Hello and welcome to the Stockout. This is your show at FreightWaves for all things related to the CPG and retail industries. I am one of your hosts, Mike Baudendistel. I'm joined by someone who always plays 3D and 4D chess, Grace Sharkey. Grace, good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I hope you and your family had a good Easter weekend, and it's finally spring. Spring is sprung. I feel like so. I'm doing good over here. I hope everything's good with you.
It is, yeah. So it looks like I'm going to be, moving about 3 miles east to the east side in Lakewood. So lots going on
Nice.
here with my family. But today we have lots to talk about with the tariffs, as always. Lots of great articles on FreightWaves.com. This is going to be a busy week between all the stuff with the tariffs coming out, and you have earnings season, so you get a lot of good comments from companies, like kind of we did last week with JB Hunt. I think we covered that on the site, but a lot of interesting things there. So we'll go through some of what's written, up on the site that pertains, I think, pretty specifically to retail and CPG, and then we're going to have a guest who's very knowledgeable on a lot of those issues. Came to us, recommended by one of his colleagues. Patrick Penfield is his name. So should be a great show. Before we do that, I want to make sure everyone knows how to sign up for the Stockout newsletter, which is up on FreightWaves.com. You go to FreightWaves.com/the Stockout, or just go up to newsletters at the top and go to the Stockout. It's the second one there under Market Insights. So I'd encourage everyone to do that. Aim to get that out on Wednesdays about 2 p.m. Eastern time. And so with that, we'll go through the first article here, written by Eric Kulish. I feel like I've been talking a lot about his articles lately because he's been
Yeah.
following the de minimis just so closely. And so Eric's article that's up on the front of the site, talking about how DHL is temporarily suspending B2C shipments over $800 to the U.S. So I guess it's in this range of between $800 and $2,500. So it does not include anything that's B2B, and it also wouldn't include anything that is under 800, which would be, I believe, still under the de minimis, as long as it's not from China, and then the China exemption gets removed in May 2nd. But this seems like this could be something that could cause a lot of headaches for shippers and retailers, maybe including a lot of those small businesses. So it goes into effect today, and it's you have this suspension of the BSC shipments on DHL until it can expand its operations to manage the surge in volume of filing the formal customs entries. And so essentially, before the goods that were in that 800 to 250, $800 to $2,500 range could be cleared via sort of a simplified informal process. And now this is ratcheting up where it has to include the formal process, which includes the country of origin, recipient's tax ID, all of those things to ensure that the proper import duties are being collected. So that is going to include more paperwork. And it seems like a lot of things in that range would include, like, laptop computers is kind of the one thing that really sort of stands out to me. That would be about $2,000. And then, Eric also talks about how the de minimis exemption now set to be removed on May 2nd for imports coming in from China and Hong Kong, still going to stay in place for now on other countries, but the majority of the de minimis shipments, those less than $800, so they don't qualify for import tax. The majority of those are from China. That includes a lot of the cheap e-commerce, Temu, Shein, and those things. And then, Eric also wrote up an article along similar lines, talking about the air freight industry and the impact that all these things could have on the air freight industry, citing some studies from various analysts and consultants. Air freight revenue could collapse $22 billion if the White House maintains these 125% tariffs on China. We'll see what happens. So a lot being impacted there. And I think one of the themes, just going through all of the information on FreightWaves.com today, is that I think a lot are making the argument that small shippers are going to be the ones most impacted by the tariffs, and saying that these kind of small businesses are going to be able to bear the brunt of it. And some of the things that have been cited are like Shein and Temu. They can rearrange their supply chains to do more fulfillment, domestically. Ryan Peterson of Flexport was talking about how it's viable for some of the big shippers to do business in Vietnam to avoid tariffs coming from China, but it's really not an option for small shippers that are not providing a huge amount of volume to a country like Vietnam. And then one of the interesting comments from I think a week or so ago is Gene Soroka, who's sort of the face of the Port of LA, who's expecting a volume drop off later in the year, said that a lot of the large shippers are really the ones that are able to pull forward shipments in order to avoid tariffs. It's really the small shippers just don't have that degree of flexibility, in their supply chain. So we hope that there's not going to be a lot of small, businesses that are impacted by this. But that seems to be a theme, or at least an argument that's being made by a lot of different, constituents here. And Grace, you've looked into, some of the information about China pushing to buy in China. We did talk about this some last week, but what did you find in the last few days?
Yeah, so last week we covered a lot of like the TikTok aspect of it, and almost more of this push for even the U.S. consumer to purchase directly, right, from these Chinese manufacturers. But over the weekend, there was reports of Chinese leadership meeting with the tech companies to really focus on improving really a more buy in China perspective. So this would be almost more of China itself making sure that it's buying its products, and that clearly almost a fight, right, against these tariffs and companies not being able to purchase and then fly those goods over to the United States. Well, China needs to keep making these products in order to stay afloat. So who's going to buy them? And that's why a number of tech companies met with leadership to work and see how they can make that happen. JD.com, which actually is a company I've actually covered a little bit more when I first started here. They actually are looking to fund about are using about $27 billion in funds to buy products from Chinese exporters. And JD.com is almost like an Amazon for the Chinese over there as well. And other companies like ByteDance, which you might know, of course, is TikTok, Tencent, and others, Alibaba, is working to create teams to help over 10,000 exporters sell at least 100,000 products each there in China too. So again, it's interesting. It's to see as these tariffs come out, different ways that not only governmental entities, but it looks like tech companies as well are trying to support those. Of course, we've seen Ryan Peterson be pretty vocal about the work that they're doing to help their shippers, of course, navigate this the best that they can too. And to touch on, I think, the air freight aspect that you brought on, of course, most of the readers know I cover a lot of tech in this industry. It's very interesting because in the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of technologies go into almost the opposite of this problem they're afraid of now, being able to somehow find more space on their assets in order to move more freight across the globe via air. And now to hear that is turning, I'm interested, of course, in how investors are responding to all of this, but it's very interesting to see just the ebbs and flows of what that market has gone through over the last couple of years as well. So, there's a disruption to say the least. I want to say it was Aaron Rubin and also Ryan Peterson both last week talking about small shipping companies, small consumer goods companies selling their companies back to Chinese manufacturers, just not being able to compete or figure out the tariff situation. So yeah, it's, the great thing about us, Mike, is that we get to do the show on Monday. So we get to almost review all of these different strategies that companies are trying to figure out. On top of that, of course, we talked about fraud last week too when it comes to those tariffs. So I don't think the news on this is going to slow down at all as we approach, the May deadlines here in the next week and a half or 2 weeks as well.
Yeah, and one of the surprising things too is all this stuff today about the ocean rates actually rising a little bit. Stuart Churls wrote about that up on the site. Also saw Wall Street Journal was covering that, and that was just really counterintuitive because it just seems like demand is down, supply is up. So something there is very unusual that's happening. It sounds like there's maybe some expectation of demand being repositioned into Europe, which those are pretty long routings there. So that's an industry to watch as well. One thing that's also related to this is a lot of the short haul versus long haul freight markets. Zach Strickland over the weekend wrote up an article. This is something we've been talking a lot about with clients, is some of these dynamics that are different by length of haul. And so the short haul freight, he argues, is a little bit more of a bellwether for the broader economy than the longer haul markets. And longer haul markets are going to be more impacted by things like rail intermodal service levels and import volumes that are being pulled forward. So there's been a lot of noise in a lot of these longer haul markets. Have an interesting sonar chart that shows kind of what's happened in the last year. And what it showed is that on the city lanes that we define as being less than 100 miles, you see that white line, our truckload movements of less than 100 miles. That could include drayage. It could just include local movements. Those are down about 3% year over year, but that's held up a lot better than all truckload tenders, which are down about 12% year over year. That's going to include different types of equipment. And then you can contrast that with the long haul truckload volumes. Those are down 23%, but the rail intermodal volume is that green line that would include international intermodal, the 40-foot containers, and also the domestic intermodal, the 53-foot containers. Those are up about 3% year over year. So clearly some shift from long haul trucking to intermodal. A lot of that has to do with the goods needing to move slower, not having to move as fast because of those large shippers pulling goods forward to avoid tariffs. It still seems like some of that might be underway because of the 90-day reprieve for tariffs that are not China. So you still have shippers have some period of time to get those goods loaded. I believe if they're on the ocean, they're not included in the tariffs as of the tariff deadline. So still a lot influx there. So would encourage everyone to just keep updated. Look at Sonar, look at the FreightWaves.com site, look at GoSonar.com. We have good information there too. And with that, I want to bring in today's guest. Do we have Patrick?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I'm here.
Great.
Hi, everybody.
So thanks for joining us. Patrick Penfield, why don't you give us a little bit of an intro on yourself, sort of how long you've been following supply chains and what do you make of all this, the tariffs?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Patrick Penfield. I'm a professor of supply chain practice here at the Whitman School of Management, Syracuse University. So I've been teaching for 20 years. Prior to being in academia, I was in industry for 15 years. So I was a vice president of operations. And yeah, this is a mess. The whole thing's a mess. And so, I'm a globalist, so I believe in free trade. And so, the tariff situation is just causing a lot of chaos and it's causing a lot of issues and problems, with companies in general. So it's a fascinating time from a historical standpoint. But again, if you're in business, if you're in sourcing, this is just brutal.
Yeah, Patrick, again, thank you so much for joining us. And I can't imagine even be a part of teaching throughout this or process or part of the education aspect of teaching students about this moment in history. But the one thing I want to ask you is we covered a lot of kind of the reactions, right, that we're seeing from companies when it comes to these tariffs in particular. And I'm interested in what you're hearing from maybe shippers or seeing reaction-wise that you think might be a more advantageous route compared to maybe other strategies that you've seen.
I think for shippers it's difficult, right? I mean, if you're domestic, this is probably not a bad time, right? So I think this is probably part of the thinking of the Trump administration, right? So again, if we could do more domestically, I think your domestic shippers will do quite well. It's just a question of being able to switch and flip supply chains that quickly, and I think that's what's being lost in this whole process, right? You can't turn things on overnight. It just doesn't happen with a lot of industries, right? Because you've got certain industries that have been built up in different countries for so long, and then just to try and bring them back that quickly would be really difficult. So I guess if you're a domestic shipper, it might be a good situation, right? Especially if again, the goal is to move as much domestic manufacturing here in the States. And I'm a proponent of manufacturing. I love manufacturing. I think here in the United States, it's the right thing to do. It's just a question of how you do it. And I think that's, again, the issue here that we have going on with the Trump administration.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to the time when I was in college, and it seemed like the professors at that time like universally hated tariffs. So I can't imagine like how much fun they're having with all of that. Is that still the sort of the prevailing sentiment in academia, or is there any sort of sympathy for China pegs its currency? There's human rights abuses there. Maybe they dump goods on the U.S., et cetera.
Yeah, I think for the most part, you need tariffs sometimes to protect industries and to protect situations, right? So I can understand that, and I think most people can sign up for that. The dilemma you have again is, what does it do? So we've seen there's actually papers out there that talk about tariffs and their impact to economies, and there was one in 2020, and it was by I think it was the International Monetary Policy, and it was 3 gentlemen from the IMF, and there was a person from academia. And they did a study, and they looked at tariffs, I think, for the past 65, 70 years. And the conclusion was this, is that tariffs will impact GDP, and usually what you see is that GDP falls in countries that enact high tariffs. So historically, it's shown that, hey, this is not a good situation. You can go even farther back if you look at history. Smoot-Hawley Act in the 30s, right when the United States was in the Depression. It drove the Depression, it drove us into a deeper depression because of this protectionist that happened. So again, it's not, I think it's just not folks in academia, it's just history. History has shown us that tariffs are not good for economies, especially in the long term. It just restrains trade. Then this protectionism comes up, and then everybody kind of stops trading, and that's what's going to hurt the global economy.
How do you see maybe the administration moving forward from here? Maybe from your perspective, do you have? And I know this is a tough question, right? We all wish we could be in Trump's mind right now, but from your perspective, do you have an idea of maybe where he's going with this? Where potentially this could, I don't want to say end, but the long-term goal that he's looking for on this?
Yeah, I think where it could end is if we go into a recession, right? And so I think that's the only thing that's really going to kind of push President Trump to do something different. So my hope is that maybe he's going to try to negotiate some trade agreements. The problem with negotiating trade agreements, it takes time, right? It's not something you can do quickly and fast. A lot of times these countries get together, you're having a meeting, and they go back to their countries, and they've got to talk to their constituents, and then it's not like something that can be resolved in a couple of hours. And I think that's the issue. And now you're talking hundreds of countries, right, that want to do some type of trade agreement with the United States, and that's where it gets very complex. So I would think probably what will happen is if the stock market continues to drop like it is, if the United States goes into recession, I think he has no choice. I mean, again, if he wants popular opinion, or if he wants people to like him, he's going to have to change, what he does. And he's kind of talked about that also, right? So he's given himself some flexibility that he's going to try to negotiate some trade deals and do this and that. And so my hope is that hopefully he'll see that this is not a good situation that's going on here from an economic standpoint. To be quite honest with you, I think, everything was pretty good when he became president, right? And I think that, again, just kind of going down the same path we've been going down when Biden was in office might have been a better approach. And again, I'm an independent. I have no, from a party standpoint, no allegiance to any party. I just look at more from a supply chain viewpoint. And so, unfortunately, this is really impacting us adversely.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, almost unprecedented uncertainty here, for sure. I want to maybe shift gears and just, from your perspective, is supply chain, transportation, logistics, is that an area that a lot of students are looking to study? I mean, I know for a long time it was something that was kind of under the radar, and then during COVID it became the hot thing, and Amazon maybe made it the hot thing too. Like how is it right at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's excellent. I think a lot of students are very interested. in logistics and trade and how we move things. And I think that's a real hot topic right now. So I can tell you this, just having conversations in my classroom about tariffs, and the students are concerned and they do like how things happen. And we talk about trade and what's going on, how we move things. And so I think for the most part, students get excited over, my students do from a supply chain standpoint about how we move things here in the States and globally. I think it's, again, fascinating for the situation to be happening because it's really good from a discussion standpoint. So we can kind of talk about tariffs or impact. It's interesting. We talk about how costs are going to be impacted, but just think about the complexity of just bringing stuff through or trying to move things, from different ports. And then with the things changing so rapidly with, different types of, freight tariffs and charges. And I feel bad for the customs folks. And we have this discussion in classes, how do you manage that? And then think about just the lead time and then, all the issues and ramifications those folks are going through. And so I think to be quite honest with you, I think a lot of supply chain students are very interested in trade and how we move things.
On that note, it's interesting because outside of this show, I also cover fraud events in this industry, and maybe even in an accidental way. There's a lot of talks of how companies are going to be managing these tariffs in particular, and maybe the interesting ways that they can somehow maybe get around some of these high percentages. There's a push more of talks over the weekend of China setting up shell companies to maybe avoid some of that. What are you maybe predicting? Is there any cleverness that we could see behind the tariffs themselves that, just speaking on the poor customs people, are going to have to maneuver through and manage?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the customs folks. I just feel horrible for them because there is definitely going to be a lot of things going on. So, we talk about this in class, right? So the thing is always to remember to be ethical, to stay within our legal laws and structures, and to make sure that we're doing business the right way, right? So that's the one thing we don't want to do, right? So, but laws are there, and this is what businesses do. They look at different loopholes as far as what to do and how to do things, right? So, one thing that you potentially can do is this thing called tariff duty engineering, right? So we can look at a product and then figure out, okay, how can we change that product slightly just to give it a different tariff classification? So I'll give you an example. So Columbia Sportswear, they make what they call nurses T-shirts, and I'm not sure if you're aware of these, but they're pockets that are below the waistline for the most part. And so why they've done that is because they can get a lower tariff rate. So, that's something that, again, is what companies are going to be looking at. They have to. Another thing that you could look at is tariff and duty inversion. So this is where maybe we have a product that we're bringing the components in, and they have a very high tariff rate. Well, why not just bring in the whole finished good? Maybe that might be cheaper. So an example might be fabrics, and maybe you're making furniture in the States, and then you realize, oh my God, I just bring the whole couch. That's a lot cheaper than the individual components from a tariff standpoint. So I think a lot of this is going to be going on because you just have to. Again, you're not doing anything illegal. You're not doing anything that's against the law, right? Or you're just really trying to figure out what's the best way that I can bring in product at the lowest cost. And I think this is going to be going on. I think a lot of people are going to be playing games. You guys just talked about this earlier about bringing inventory in, not to get hit with the tariff. And that's going to be happening, right? So again, if you see these postponements, I could see more companies bringing stuff in. My concern is really kind of a back to school shopping, so I'm just worried about, the shock that consumers are going to see if things don't change from a tariff standpoint. And I think that's going to be where I think Americans will realize that this tariff thing's a pretty bad situation.
Yeah, we only have about 1 minute left, but I just want to ask you, has there been any sort of interesting supply chain data point or research report that's just come across your desk that's really sort of taking you by surprise? I do think the moving the pockets lower to avoid tariffs is fascinating too.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think that's the thing. There hasn't been a lot of talk about studies done on tariffs and their impact to the global economy. And I wish people would talk more about that and say, look at these studies and look, we know historically this is a bad thing. This doesn't work. So again, it makes sense when you're trying to protect some industries or there's some, things happening, with child labor, stuff like that. Totally get that. And I think that's what they're there for. But I think, just to do what we're doing right now, it's just crazy. It's just causing paralysis with a lot of companies. And, it's just not good from an economic standpoint. Oops, sorry, I can't hear you.
I muted myself. That's why. And you mix in your comment too with the consumer aspect, right, of it, and it seems like not the best time, right, to be out there purchasing. But I do, Patrick, want to thank you so much for joining us as well. If people want to learn more about you or reach out to you, what's the best way for our audience to do so?
Yeah, I'm at Syracuse University, PCPENFIE at syr.edu. Happy to talk with anyone. So always happy to talk about supply chain.
I love it. Yeah, the pockets part is fascinating. Well, might have to have you on just to talk about these little routes around the customs and tariffs as well. And for our audience, thank you so much for joining us again. But of course, speaking of fraud, I want to let you know about our fraud event, right? That's coming up here soon. Head to live.freightwaves.com where you can, of course, see all of our events. But we'll have our Freight Fraud Symposium, our first one-day event on fraud ever in Dallas, Texas on May 14th. You can, of course, register for that again at live.freightwaves.com. We're going to have some incredible people a part of the show to talk about these issues. Overhaul will be there. Highway will be there. We'll also have Gen Logs, DAT as well. So this is affecting all of the industries, all the people within the industry. And we want to make sure everyone's there to, of course, share their stories and help all of us get through the various pieces of fraud. Of course, make sure that you join our fraud newsletter too. Head to freightwaves.com, click on newsletters, join the Stockout, join, of course, Fraud Watch, so you can stay up to date on the different fraud stories that happen week over week here too. And other than that, I think that's it for now. We'll be back probably next week with some even more tariff talks as we get ready for those May deadlines.